Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another installment of the Sofa series, Artist Spotlight. Today with me is composer and pianist and interdisciplinary artist, sound artist, dot, 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 it goes on. Mark Barden is joining us from Berlin. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hi. Okay, so tell us a
Hi.
little bit about how does a Midwestern boy make it out to Berlin? What's the little abbreviated, abridged version of how you got to where you are today?
You move for love or money. It's totally true. And I came for money. I had a scholarship to do. Long story short, I was infatuated with a then recently deceased Russian composer named Alfred Schnittke,
Hmm.
and won a fellowship from the Thomas J. Watson Foundation to go out and pursue my passion for 1 full year on the condition that I do not return to my home for an entire year. So it was this really immersive, like, barring any family emergencies, go out in the world, do something you're passionate about, um, write us a postcard and come back in 1 year. And
Yeah.
so it was during that time that I was sort of chasing the trail of his musical um, endeavors, which led me to Hamburg, Germany. That's how I got
Mhm.
to Germany. I was in London for doing research at the archive there. I gave a recital at the Institute for Russian Music, all Russian music program. And so I was sort of deep in contemporary Russian music stuff and discovered during that year the city of Berlin
Mhm.
and fell in love with a thing that made me want to stay in Berlin for a longer time, which didn't pan out. But during that period, I discovered that was a real home for me. Berlin had already become a home, and it was a great place for me to work out my creative path, because I did have this sort of mishmash of serious interest in piano, coupled with a serious desire to create my own objects and works and things.
Mhm.
Um, and Berlin is a great place to get lost in positive and negative senses.
Yeah.
And uh, I experienced both in varying proportions, and
In
I
all
can
of the
happily
extremes, I'm sure.
all of the extremes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot on offer here, and just looking culturally, there's three major opera houses, just for instance, and there's four orchestras. It was two cities for
Yeah.
a large, when
Yeah.
I was growing up. It was two cities,
Yeah.
and you really feel that. You feel this. You feel the scars of history here. You feel sort of a friend of mine. She says Berlin is a city that attracts dissidents,
Mhm.
and it's true. It's for me. It's turned into a magical sort of place that I've now been here over 15 years.
That's
I've sort
it.
of
You're
lost
an
track.
official expat, right?
Hardcore, yeah,
No looking
hardcore.
back. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
Berlin itself, I, I think those of us in the United States get a little like, oh, that must be so nice, to have some sort of state funding for the arts, and that you don't have to beg for it and fight for it. That it just exists. It's just part of the cultural landscapes that it is expected.
Sure.
That as to be a modern society, culture needs to be nourished, right? And
Yeah.
but Berlin, it's specifically, I think your friend is saying that it attracts dissidents, that it's like you can have everything from really perfectly crafted Bach to the most
Mm.
spectacular performance art that makes you question your space and body, and it's so well rounded, an art scene that it's envied.
And everything in between.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the worst productions in my lifetime, shoddiest, laziest work, and some of the most incredible, blood, sweat, and tears, years of all of that from the huge teams of people. You see everything in between, and that's cool. And sometimes you even see that at the same venue
Yeah.
on different nights.
Yeah.
So it's a real wild card, and like no guarantees. It also has this huge reputation as a big party city, which it does have,
Yeah.
big time. Probably in a unique way. At the same time, it is totally possible to end up going to a party that is, where there's four people there
Yeah.
at a place that otherwise is bursting at the seams. Like, and this element of like chance and unpredictability and like always shifting under your feet
Hmm.
is for me a real constant. And I'm sort of delighted when I it sounds weird, but I'm sort of delighted when I have little bummer moments in Berlin because it's like that's interesting.
Yeah,
Like
like, oh, it's a real place.
it's a real place.
Yeah.
There are real successes, real failures, peaks and valleys.
Yeah, like any good, well-rounded place should have, right? It can't
Right.
all be like puppy dogs and rainbows.
Yeah.
Would that it could. That would be great.
I would move there.
I would move
If
there.
Puppy Dogs in Rainbowsville, sign me up.
I'm in. It would never happen in Germany, though.
Right.
No, no. So let's talk about a little bit about that kind of like that confluence, that sort of like integration of like perfectly crafted with the sort of accidental and maybe a total mistake. So you'd written a paper called Staging Failure. Error as compositional material. So I'm curious about that. Is in your compositional practice?
Yeah.
Is the error coming from you, or from a conversation between the people that are going to be playing the piece? And how does that come into play for you?
Yeah. So a couple things here, sort of right off the bat. Part of what I'm doing with that language is, and this is not unique to me,
Right.
it is, you know, taking words that normally have a negative association and sort of turning them on their head. So when I talk about risk and failure and things sort of not working, this is actually a hopeful endeavor. It is sort of coming from a place that understands any communication as as a failure of some sort. Like I have a thought, even if I'm just communicating with myself. This is the classic. I have an idea for a piece, for something, for a piano piece. I have an idea, and now I sit down and I try to create something. And whatever I create is going to be this, and whatever my idea was is going to be this. And there's a chasm in between that could be tiny or it could be enormous, but in both cases it's infinite. And there's never a way for this to be that. And so if that's what we're in, that sense, everything is a failure. Every time I try to formulate a thought, like I've warped something, I've distorted it, it's come out a little refracted, and that is something that I actually want to celebrate and sort of shine a light on. So a concrete example of this would be, there's a piano piece that I've written that requires the pianist to repeat a short section of music, just a short little passage of say like 2 or 3 seconds. They play it, they have a little pause, then they play exactly the same thing again, the same sequence of notes, a little bit faster, and they repeat this process until they've gotten to their own physical threshold, where it is now, I'm playing so fast that I cannot execute this text faithfully anymore. And what now begins to happen is the musical text is demanding that the player enter a genuine space of the unknown, where they're having an authentic engagement with their own physical limitations, which everyone has, and so much of what virtuosity about and performance is masking these our insecurities, our vulnerabilities, and projecting this image. The virtuoso is the one who effortlessly executes any technical task demanded, and this is asking for a different kind of virtuosity, a virtuosity of empathy, of showing, like, of being brave enough in that moment to genuinely expose something vulnerable and trust that there's a beauty in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also sort of it's a little bit like preying on all of the things that we train out of ourselves in the conservatory world. It's right
Yeah.
that the private versus the public, that the moments of failure are entirely locked away in a practice room, and it is between you and your instrument and nobody else needs to see that. We don't want to see that. We want to see the sort of refined art is beautiful, to steal a quote from Marina Abramovich, but
Mm.
that perfect little picture. We don't want the like the blood and the calluses, and we don't want the bruises, and we don't want that. We want the shiny refined thing. And so yeah, does it feel a little exploitative to push instrumentalists or anybody to that breaking point? And do people resist it? Has anybody resisted that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely. There's a evil puppet master tendency to perceive this like, oh, I make people go out there and fall on their faces or embarrass themselves or something, and I honestly that's so foreign to me as an idea that uh, I don't know how to. Really even how to imagine a mindset where like that's what I would want to be doing,
Right.
because in anything that I create, even if I'm interpreting an existent work, that's also certainly a form of creation, and any of that is invested, any of that is a risk, and so even if it's a composition of mine, like I'm already doing this thing. I'm not sealing myself in a glass tower and saying, like I am the flawless genius and you minions need to, you know,
Good God, I
do my
hope at
bidding
some
or
point we
something,
can get rid of that bullshit. They're just like,
right?
I'm the God and you execute the voice of God, me. It's like, I think
Yeah,
we're starting to break down that relationship between performer and composer, I hope.
yeah. I mean, I don't want to derail us with this sort of with these sorts of politics, but they're there and they're real. Like the institutions actually demand that of you. Like if you write a piece for orchestra and you attend a rehearsal of that piece, you are expected, and I don't actually see a way around um, being able to answer every single question immediately and have a rock solid vision. Like you need to be 100% secure and sure about everything, every note you've written, every decision that's on that page. Otherwise, you're going to gunk up the works and people are going to get unfocused. The rehearsal time is not going to be working well. People are not going to believe in the music that they're being asked to execute. They're going to, it's tricky. And so, and this is also just working with a group that size. Um, what I'm saying is it demands you to be this certain type of person
Yeah.
or
Leader.
performative thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
leader. Yeah,
Yeah.
you need to be a flawless leader in that moment, and you need to have ready answers. And there's zero room for saying like, right here, I'm looking for something and it's unclear. Like,
Oh.
get the hell out. You
Yeah.
know, we're here to execute something solid and finished, and that's it. And bending the institution of the orchestra, bending it out of that. I mean, there's some experiments where people are trying to do this, but good luck. I
Yeah.
think that's very difficult. I think bending the opera, the institution of the opera out of that is difficult. And these are things I want to do, but I do look at them as pretty serious challenges. And the only way I know how to do it or can imagine it working is with a trusted group of, a trusted team that you've spent years working with and where
Yeah.
you've like really built trust and love among each other.
Yeah, and there's also like, so for those of us who do contemporary music and we work with composers a lot, there's a lot
Yeah.
of it is personal. I think
Right.
the relationship that you build with a
Yeah.
composer, and I think it can be difficult maybe to convey that kind of close relationship with a large ensemble or these sort of like big
Yeah.
groups, these institutions,
Yeah.
and then you kind of have to create almost like a little shorthand, this type of communication that is unique to the event between the performer and the composer. I mean, do you prefer? I guess that's not really the question, but do you work in that way with chamber ensembles, with soloists? Is it much more intimate, and you have a little bit more of a free interplay of ideas?
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, the smaller the group, the deeper you can go. Is a good general rule, and not necessarily true, but my what I've been focusing on for the past 6 months or so is actually virtual.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm working with a visual artist who has designed a 3D virtual environment, and I've got my Oculus Quest
Oh my
is over here,
God.
and this is what working looks like right now. Is
Yeah.
I ride my bike, 10 minutes over to Julian's place, and we sit and we make adjustments. We go inside and
Uh-huh.
then test things, see how everything sounds, how it looks, where the glitches are, and all this. And so that's been interesting because it's my first, definitely my first virtual project, but also um, understanding what is the same about that and writing a string quartet, or working with two musicians, or working with an orchestra. Um, there's definitely common ground, but it is strange. It is a
Yeah.
strange, it's a strange space. And what you do is you're actually putting so much more emphasis. I'm pretty excited about it actually, because it takes the focus off of the composer interpreter,
Uh-huh.
or let's say composer musician relationship, and it's focusing entirely on the listener,
Mm-hmm.
basically, who becomes an interpreter. That they've sort of, you fuse the roles of musician and listener kind of into one,
Yeah.
because we're creating a space where you're making decisions that influence your experience, and we've sort of offered a world, and within the world that we've made, you're crafting your own world, you're curating your own
It's the modern choose your
thing.
own
You're
adventure.
exactly,
Yeah.
and it's. I mean, once you go virtual, it's literally infinite what you can do,
Yeah.
and that was
Is that
intimidating at
overwhelming?
first. I
Yeah.
mean, and also no one is a master of these of all of the tools available. So,
Right.
my collaborator is a visual artist. I'm a composer. I'm not a video game sound designer, for example, which is a
Mm-hmm.
completely
Yeah.
different skill set.
Yeah.
And he does have a background in 3D modeling,
Mm-hmm.
but in 3D sound, sonic spatialization. This is also sort of like a new area. So we have a team of developers that are helping us understand that. And it's like, um, yeah, it's a whole different ball game. And perfect for the Corona
I know. I was just thinking that. How
moment we're
prescient.
having.
you
Yeah,
know. So
yeah,
forward thinking of you. My God. You were
yeah.
thinking ahead. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that. Like the infinite to me, it's like there's a couple of things that I cannot fathom. I cannot fathom a billion. I don't get it. I don't, I don't understand infinity. I just don't get it. It feels to me like that is just overwhelming to have too many options. How do you? I guess how do you narrow your scope?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the one good thing about um, the technology being so advanced, and literally any user being a novice unless they have studied that software for,
Mm,
you know, years, is that you're naturally limit. You have some natural limitations just technically.
mm-hmm.
Like, okay, we understand. For instance, if you have a sound object in this virtual space, here is your object, and around this object you can define a minimum distance and a maximum distance,
Okay.
um, and this is where the sound will be audible in this space, right? Um, and the minimum distance is sort of like, this is within this sphere, the sound remains at 100% volume,
Mm-hmm.
and as you move to this other sphere, it gets quieter. You can
Mm,
define on a curve how much quieter it gets. Is it linear? Is it logarithmic? Is it a nice sinusoidal curve? Do you want to draw something by hand? Do you want to do something crazy where it's like the sound is loud, and then as you move away, it's quiet, and then it's loud again?
mm-hmm.
You can do anything really
Mm-hmm.
in this space. Um, so already we have this simple tool, and it's like, of all of the tools possible, it's just one of, it's a simple one, but it's this different size infinities thing, because if we just focus on that curve idea I talked about,
Mm-hmm.
that is literally infinite,
Mm-hmm.
just the curves, and what always helps me with any of this, and this is also and relates to the article you referenced in my interest in failure and risk, is it comes down to having a human body and perceiving a stimulus with your senses.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end, like no matter what else is out there, that is the experience that you're driving towards.
Mm.
And so basically, yes, the curves are infinite, but you do 3 or 4 tests and you're like, okay, I'm only interested in that one and that one, maybe that one once, and you're
Yeah,
done.
that's
And
it.
now you've limited infinite to 3. That's the process.
Do you find, well, first of all, how will this piece exist? Like, is it something that people can just sort of download on Steam, or is
Right.
it like a gallery type of a happening kind of a thing?
So there will be a physical opening event that we'll do in Berlin at the Konzerthaus. The sounds were actually, it's a production, co-production with them, and their orchestra was actually serves as the basis for the sound material. So I composed things for the orchestra. We
Oh,
had 3 days of recordings, which was totally luxurious with
wow.
my friend and sound technician collaborator, Carola Perry. She's a brilliant German sound technician from Hamburg. And so basically we got like a huge bank of live recorded sound.
Wow.
And this was also another major decision we made, which was to not do any sound processing. So everything that you hear is actually just acoustic, recorded acoustic sound, without digital processing. So anyway, so we did that, and then we've got we'll have some live openings, and then afterwards it will be publicly available in the foyer of the Konzerthaus Berlin, which is sort of in the middle of the city, and gets a lot of tourist traffic. And it's a free installation, so we'll have like a number of these
Oh, great.
glasses and a number of headphones. There's also some hand controllers that you can use, and we have very simple functions because the demographic is people who are specialists in this. So that's our
Yeah.
I want all of my judgy friends to be able to go into this and be like, okay, it's actually pretty interesting what you're doing with sound, right? Julian wants all of his judgy friends to look at it and be like, okay, good job, man. Like, that's cool.
Like, whoa,
And
tough
then,
crowd.
and then, like my boyfriend's grandma needs to
Yeah.
be able to not be totally lost,
Yeah,
So,
user interface is a major thing. I think that yeah, it has to be kind of accessible for
right.
sure, for
Right,
sure. Otherwise, you
and
lost.
accessibility is like not a thing that I don't newsflash that contemporary classical composers tend to be terribly concerned with.
What are
So,
you talking about? What? Oh no.
so we're keeping it simple. I'm trying to do we have there's also talk about a little infinity of options here. We have the button that you operate with your middle finger, the button you operate with your index finger, and then we have the joystick that you operate with your thumb,
Ooh.
and that's all we're doing. So there's a number of other functions we're not dealing with, and we'll see. It's a trip. It's a trip for sure, and it's strange for me to get away from the immediacy of sound production,
Hmm.
of bodies scratching, strings with hair in order to produce vibrations in the air,
Yep.
right? And so I guess that's what's exciting is putting, there is something live about the virtual experience,
Hmm.
but it's all the user. It's 100%, user as interpreter, as maker,
I
as
mean, did you
curator.
ever did you ever consider do you, this is a really shitty question. Do you consider the listener like ever?
I
Nah.
haven't even heard that word before today, actually. Um, yeah, I mean, sure. Something I think about a lot is the aspects of how can I say this? What is the music, and then what is the stuff that isn't part of the music that we're sort of like not supposed to pay attention to,
Right. Right.
right?
Yeah.
Page turning. for
Yeah.
example. That's not part of the music.
Taking in the
Um,
breath, you know,
Taking in the
the
breath.
inhalation. Yeah.
Right. Obviously, all of the, the creaking of the stools and someone unwrapping a cough drop, all of
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
These are just focusing on that boundary for a minute. I think there's really interesting work to be done there. I think there's really silly things to be done there. I've seen both,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's an area you can choose to focus, and for me, this is something that's exciting about that is number one, that it really has to do with the listening experience. When you're crafting something and you're thinking, let's take a bad idea, right? Bad idea being like an orchestra piece where everyone's turning the pages,
Yeah.
right?
And adjusting music stands. I've seen it.
Right. I've seen it. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be too dogmatic because I think anything can be really good or really bad or
Sure.
really stupid or really smart. Like even
Yeah.
the same thing.
In the
And
same. Yeah.
there's a piece by Peter Ablinger that is this. It's people setting up for, right?
Yeah.
Setting up. And I'll tell you what, you can do that piece very well and it can be pretty good. And you can do it very badly and it can be really bad. It's a real interpretive challenge. But this page turning for orchestra thing, if we focus on that, I don't know. That for me, this is like goes a little bit too far gimmick. I see what we're doing. I think that's interesting. If I come at the same kind of thing a little bit different, it's like if I'm editing a recording, do I want to get rid of the inhales? Do I want to get rid of the page turns? Or are those actually poignant reminders of the human beings?
There's a person playing that shit. Yeah.
Right. You know what? They need oxygen in their lungs before they play that multiphonic.
Yeah.
So you hear them do that, and that's okay. Or you hear a page turn, and that's okay. So it really gets down to the fundamentals of like, what is music for you?
Right.
Is music a thing that human beings do with their bodies for other bodies? And or is music this abstract kind of transcendent thing that we're trying to touch? I'm not actually saying one is right or wrong. I don't know. It sort of depends on what side of the bed I woke up on. I think they can both be interesting. I'm interested, theoretically in both, but all my chips right now are in the former and just saying, this is a thing we do with our bodies. It's interesting. It's interesting to feel a connection between those bodies, and so that's what I want to make happen. And something that really makes me feel very disconnected from performing bodies as a listening body is when is actually conventional virtuosity. I saw a concert of a pianist who I really greatly admire, Alfred Brendel, years ago in Berlin. And it was so perfect. And I left at intermission because I was bored to tears.
Yeah.
And he is an incredible artist, performer. I mean, to do what he was doing is mind blowing, But at the end of the day, I was like, what the difference between this and sitting down and listening to one of his recordings, I'm sorry, is not big.
Yeah.
It just isn't. And that matters to me.
That does matter.
And I guess I don't know, spontaneity, the feeling that I had zero feeling that anything could at any moment, the only option in any single moment was absolute perfection. And I had to check out.
Yeah.
I had to check out, So finding strategies to let the human side through.
Well, I love that, like, so we're talking about this whole idea of like kind of virtuosity and in performance and the sort of human element in performance, and you chose to play Rachmaninoff for the Sofa series.
How about that?
A little cliche, but I loved it.
Yeah, melodrama, high melodrama. I know. This is so a friend of mine who, the same friend that I referenced earlier. Her name's Licia. She's a brilliant choreographer. She was dealing with melodrama and saying, what is it that we're communicating when we're over emoting?
Yeah.
Right. When is it appropriate, and maybe even perhaps the only response to something like historical trauma, like the trauma of what am I looking for? Chattel slavery. generations and years, like centuries of horror there. Is there a way that we can respond to that that isn't grotesque, that isn't this, and so she was responding with fairy tales and mime and Rachmaninoff and melodrama, and
Yeah.
I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a brilliant sort of connection, and it made me reevaluate my own connection to this music, because it is undeniably, I mean, Rachmaninoff is a composer that I've had my journeys. I've been totally infatuated. I've really hated it and thought it was super cheap, right? But the thing I think anyone would find impossible to deny is that there is, Rachmaninoff has a hook, right? He's got melodies.
Melodies for days.
Melodies for days.
They go on for pages. Super good.
Right, and it's something that a lot of people find immediately, powerful. And so he's dealing with these sorts of, and there are elements in music that have this visceral power that almost feel cheap, right? The crowbar, modulate up the half step, that we know from all sorts of pop music, Broadway, whatever.
Oh, man.
And the emotional lift that gives us. It doesn't matter that that that's how it is. Like, if that lift is there, sometimes it's spectacular, sometimes it's super cheesy and transparent and artificial and whatever, but like, there's an undeniable power. And it's, and how can you actually harness that in a way that isn't cheap,
Yeah.
And is it just, or is the point of this Rachmaninoff prelude to, what does it mean if you hear that and you're walling yourself off from it emotionally? You're above it. Let's say, is it just like, is that your insecurity? Is that your inability to go there with him, or is it just saying like, oh, this is inauthentic? This is I don't know. This is a simulacrum of emotion. This is not actually. I don't know. I think, and I genuinely do not know. And that's interesting. That space of of not knowing where to put myself in relation to the undeniable power of this material.
Right. Yeah. But also, I don't know, like for me, my struggle with standard repertoire, is the burden of historical, performance practice. It's the burden of like the legacy of all the thousands of mezzo sopranos who have come before me, who can sing circles around me, who seem to understand it differently than I do, and that it's like it sort of preys on my own insecurities. Like, well, maybe am I stupid? Do I just not get it? Why is this not lighting my fire? Like, and so in my own practice, coming back to, for example, Schubert, when I was a kid in college, you get your first Schubert song, and I sang it. I sang all of the German correctly, and I was like, great, I get it, I'm done. But coming back to it, it's like, oh my god, I'm a dumbass. There's like there's this layer, and then there's that layer, and then there's this layer, and like, what does that mean to me in this year? And as I'm now approaching 40, what did it mean to me 10 years ago? What will it mean to me 10 years from now? So it's kind of interesting that like I don't know, we can return to not just as different people, because you are a different person than you were the first time you ever picked up that thing. And I'm sure you played it well and correctly the first few go rounds, but what does it mean to you now?
Sure.
As a grown up?
Yeah.
Like, are you finding like maybe a richer connection to it, or is it still like just sort of an exploration of technique and heavy pause on the keyboard there?
Yeah, I mean, you said the F word, 40, which is definitely on the horizon.
Yep.
And I was just talking with Julia, my collaborator, about this today. He is 45, and he is an old guy in the world of digital art. He is the old generation. Because it's digital art,
That's
right?
gross.
The young generation,
Yeah.
they're like 14.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
So, So yeah, things change as and and it's not like it always gets richer. I think so. Returning to Rachmaninoff for me was I was glad to see it in a new light
Mm,
because at the end of the day, uh, it's music that I can engage with, but it doesn't engage me at, I'd say, the deepest level that I'm interested in going. I
mm,
actually like things that are um, a bit beyond my grasp. I'm as an interpreter, as a listener, huge fan of Scriabin, of Bach. I mean,
mm-hmm.
both of those musics are intricate in ways that uh, I feel like I can never get the whole picture
Mm-hmm.
ever. That the best I can do is like zoom in on a part and like understand this in its richness, and then be like,
Yeah,
holy shit, that was literally of this one work. That was like a 100th,
yeah,
1% I just got there, and that's just one piece,
yeah,
you know. So there's a real like universe explosion, fractal, just it becoming itself again and again and again the
mm-hmm.
deeper you go. I mean, with Bach, there are like literally actually
Yeah,
some of these fractals
yeah.
happening in time zones and things.
The
I mean,
mechanism is mighty.
right. The mechanism is mighty. Scriabin is maybe more of an example of someone who uh, I think was actually composing beyond himself.
Mm,
Like he was finding the limit of his understanding and intentionally going beyond. I would not say the same of Bach, who regarded himself as an artisan, as a craftsman, who's,
mm,
composing is just like, hammering copper pots.
mm.
This sort of mentality, and I'm just going to sort of hammer out this. I mean, it's inspired, obviously, but so can you can be an
So can be
inspired
copper pots, you know?
copper pot,
Copper pots are
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, exactly. So, but this, and so I guess in that way, that's more what I'm interested in, is someone who's pushing the limits of their own understanding and
Mm,
of their own abilities.
mm.
And this is, I'm far from saying that this is like I can speak of a place as a specialist here, but I'm a hobby yoga enthusiast, and
So is
something.
everyone. Come
So is
on. That's the
everyone.
whole point
Everyone
of
knows.
yoga.
That's the whole point. I mean, and anyone who has stretched ever
Ever.
any part of them of their body knows the experience of, you have a limited thing.
Yeah.
My arm is here, my shoulder is here, and like I can push it to a limit, right? And then if I really push and I ride that limit and that threshold and I just stay there, I can actually push a little farther, and I can push it a little farther. And what you realize is you're actually doing something pretty amazing, which is you're taking, going back to infinity, you're
Yeah.
taking a finite thing and you're actually creating space inside of a restricted space, or something that you thought was restricted. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's the sort of perception of limitation. It's always never really what the limitation is, ever,
right.
as you know. Yeah, and so it's just that little it's the carrot, right? It's sort of guiding you through a discovery process that you didn't know was there, and that's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And that it's like stretching in that sense.
Mm.
This is something I think about. This is something I try to do. Um, yeah, I'll just put a period.
Period.
Put a little period. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think I sort of I'm with you on that. I think that music to me that doesn't necessarily like it doesn't have to reveal the mechanism behind it, but it does need to for me it needs to like ask more questions. It sort of needs to explore a sound world. It needs to explore ability. It needs to explore accessibility. It needs to feel like it's an exploration
Mm,
and not a demonstrative representation of something.
yeah.
That it asks more questions than it answers,
Mm,
which is, I think, is what I'm actually responding to when I'm going through all of your works, is that they
mm.
don't seem to, don't take this the wrong way. They don't seem to
Yeah, yeah.
say anything, right? They're not saying
Mm,
this is an opinion, this is a point of view, this is
right.
it's more of it seems more exploratory.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm really glad you used this word demonstration. That's one that I've been coming back to. as something that I'm totally not interested in. I think if the moment that I start demonstrating in my work, that's a red flag for me.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't have to be, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but um, that's a point of stagnancy, and saying, I have arrived, and I'm here to show you what that looks like, is so arrogant, um, and is the way that many people understand the tradition, and it's part of our job to change that. Because I think that couldn't be more incorrect, but it's
Right.
linked to all these things that we've been talking about. It's linked to this perception of mastery, to this need to position yourself, again, as the composer standing in front of an orchestra at rehearsal, as the person for whom there are no open questions, you know um, and whereas we all know that actually what we want art to do is to
Yeah. It's
explode
that.
these, yeah, exactly. And so if you're demonstrating, if you're delivering sort of a perfect polished thing, and this is the thing, you can't, one could misunderstand this as saying this is a license to not finish things properly, you know
No, no. I
or
mean, yeah.
and it's like there's room for polish, and there's room, but like and there's room for things to be extremely refined, but there's also a way in which the there is a way in which that sort of energy can be very wow, what's the word I'm looking for, like stultifying to the thing to the living thing that the organism you're trying to create here,
I think that's
it's
an
like, yeah.
important word too. That it's living. I think even beyond, even beyond you, right? That when
Mm,
you go, that you're that the piece is not. I don't know. I don't don't sort of look at the text as like the tome, right? It is
right.
still something that can be explored. It is still there's still always ways that you can interrogate a piece,
Mm,
and so that it beyond your final double bar line, the piece will always continue to
totally.
live. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of a whole can of worms, but I'll sort of dip in brief. I'll just sort of open the can of worms briefly,
Teeny tiny.
um, teeny tiny bit. So one of my canceled projects due to Corona was a new orchestra piece called "The Weight of Ash" that was going to be premiered here, and we were going to have a little tour. All of that is who knows. But the reason I bring it up is because it was written specifically in response to the loss of taking the idea of the loss of hearing as sort of like as a starting point. And there were 12 young amateur musicians who all have cochlear implants on either one ear or on both ears. Some have a mix, and this is for listeners who don't know. The cochlear implants are relatively new. They've been around since the 80s and have gotten better and better. Technology where there's an implant that goes inside of the cochlea, which is part of the inner ear, and then there's a sort of a hockey puck-like
Yeah.
transponder that goes on the outside that's connected to this thing. So it's a little spiral with electrodes on it, and it using this technology, you can take people who hear nothing on an ear, and they can actually hear something. And what they hear has gotten better and better and better, and it's something that was a huge revelation and revolution in hearing technology. And I got to meet these people. I did some visits at a clinic in Essen in Germany, and got to speak to people from all different generations, including like parents who were talking about getting an implant for their baby who was literally 2 months old,
Yeah.
and to a woman in her 80s who just got one on this ear and she's had one on this ear, to a woman who was living completely 100% deaf for over 1 year, and then decided that she wanted to change that. And fascinating thing about her, by the way, she describes that period of her life as extremely calming. And she was so happy to just 100% tune the world up. And she was like, I could really just go inside of myself, and I just really, things just slowed down in a really nice way. And I was like, so why did you want to hear again? And she was like, yeah, you know, as time went by, I thought it would just be convenient.
Just easier.
Just easier. But she did not have, you know, what I expected, which is that, you know, it was a traumatic experience. It was not traumatic for her at all. So you get everyone across the, from the whole spectrum. But one thing I really took away from this is that listening, hearing, is a full body experience.
Yeah.
And it is something that we do with the tiny, with people with normal hearing, do with the tiny membrane inside of our inner ear, which is vibrating sympathetically with the sound waves that are hitting it, as are little cilia inside, right?
As are the bones, yeah.
The membrane of the skin,
whole body,
the whole thing,
the whole
your
thing.
organs, you're getting a little body massage there, and it is tiny little vibrations, but that that you really feel that really do matter. So some of what I was doing was dealing with sounds that are palpable, even to people who are 100% deaf. And then also understanding this technology and how that affects hearing and how that affects music making and working with amateur musicians. And this whole thing was, for me, I came out of it with a pretty, I don't know, I'd say it's a pretty nasty truth, which is that music is 99.999% an ableist project.
Yeah.
And it's not something I ever had to think about in any other way. So I was grateful for that. I don't, you know, it's not like all of my music will now be perfectly accessible to all people, regardless of their sensorial capabilities. But it's a nice door to open, actually. And I was a little shocked, given at how much, you know, art and artists like to pat themselves on the back for being aware of asking questions from different perspectives. I was like, oh wow, this is a door I don't see almost anybody, you know, opening. Yeah, and of course, you know, that's also just my ignorance. Like there's an entire field of disability studies and of music, and there's deaf rock bands, and there's, I mean, obviously closed captions. You know, it's not the first person to think about this, but actually, you know, of working composers today to really think about, like, is the ideal audience for my music people who have 100% like healthy hearing,
right?
And I'm just not interested in any other listeners. If you're honest with yourself, I'd say almost, I don't know, I don't want to guess a number. A very high number would have to say yes. Yeah.
But no one's asking that question. I mean, I think that, but I think you're bringing up the point that going into places that maybe make you uncomfortable, make you consider something about yourself that maybe is a little ugly. But I think that's a great way to explore more. And I don't know. I'm just sort of like, because we're egocentric people, I'm now thinking it's like, well, singing is the embodied instrument, literally, right? And people are kind of blown away when somebody goes on X Factor and they're hearing impaired and they sing some aria, and they're like, how do you do that if you can't hear yourself? It's like, well, singers don't hear themselves. Singers feel themselves, you know? So it makes total sense that anybody with a hearing impairment would absolutely take up singing. It makes, to me, it's like obvious. Why don't we? I'm going to start a choir. That's it. Let's do it. Well, Mark, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me, to explore infinity. And
I think we solved it. I don't know.
Yeah?
I think we got it.
Great. So great. I'm so glad.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so thanks. Please, everybody, go dive down Mark's website. It's got some incredible works for all sorts of instrumentations, and I hope we do get to hear this project that you were working on. I hope it sees the light of day.
Yeah.
I hate
Yeah,
to
we've
say
got
when this is over because, like, who knows? But
it might happen right in the middle. I mean, we've got some plans. We've got some plans for things that are going to be shareable on social media. Like the cool thing about working in a digital environment is you can just like hit a record button and you can
yeah, send
record
it out.
video inside
Yeah,
of these spaces and things. So
yeah.
we'll see. I mean, I'm interested in. It's a good time to be interested in virtual spaces, and
Yeah, I mean the sort of you get limitations and you can reconsider your work, your process, your where what is your creativity? How who does it serve?
yeah,
I think that limitations kind of ignite some new movements. They change things and for the better. And so I'm trying to remain the optimist
yeah.
that that we'll
I
we'll
mean,
all be different.
maybe if you'll allow me to just brilliantly tie everything together
Oh
here.
my God,
Uh,
yes.
I even before Corona, something I would think about is that some of my most moving musical experiences have been home alone with headphones, lying on my couch, and yet that's not what I'm composing for. And so something about like I think this is an opportunity. This project, but also the whole Corona moment, is understanding like what is it about that? It's about what is it about that is interesting to me and is actually so moving, and it's privacy and domesticity and comfort at one level, but it's also like intense concentration and personal agency, and all of these things are kind of coming together. And so it's a good time to figure it out. I don't know. It's something that I'm going to solve, but I think what Julian and I are making now is something that can enable that sort of experience to happen. So that's exciting. It's good timing for it. So I'll keep you posted how it pans out.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Enjoy the rest of your night and happy birthday to your partner.
Thank you so much. I'll tell him.
All right.